There you go, Lone Star 54R. That's a shirt for you right there. Nothing but skulls and death, baby. That's how I roll. Anyway, Milpro Akron back at you again, YouTube. Thought we would have a little chat tonight. I was asked a question by an anti-war, anti-military hippie type who was too young to understand what hippies really are, but I thought the question was interesting and I wanted to address it. The question is, if so many people believe that what our government is doing is unconstitutional, what our politicians do is unconstitutional, that so many of our laws are unconstitutional, why doesn't the military step in to stop it or change it? Because the military takes an oath to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, which is true. Members of the military take that oath. So do members of Congress. So the question remains, why don't they? And the answer is very simple, but it may not be easily understood. It's because we are a nation of laws. It's what separates us from a banana republic. Because you elect those politicians. And if they are trampling your Constitution and trampling your rights, you're allowing it to happen. If a politician or even the president becomes an enemy of the state, there are laws and procedures in place to deal with that. It's not in the Constitution or in any of our founding documents that the military would step in and take control under any of those circumstances. That's why the process of impeachment came about. And treason, which in fact is, I believe, the only crime that's mentioned in the Constitution as far as was something a politician could commit, was taken very seriously back then. If you were aiding the enemy or working against the national interests of the United States, you were considered an enemy. Today we have a little slightly different definition of what an enemy is. We've so pacified our culture that basically as long as you're not shooting a rocket at us, you're not an enemy of our nation. We no longer care whether politicians have our nation's best interests at heart. But the core of the matter is these people were duly elected by the people. And the military can't step in every time the people make a mistake. You're supposed to be able to identify that mistake and correct it. That's why we have elections so often. It gives you an opportunity to correct a mistake that you made. And believe me, over the years you've made plenty of them. But the military can't just step in every time the citizenry screws up and elects the wrong person. That person may not even have read the Constitution, which is true of a lot of politicians, believe it or not. They can't tell you anything about the Constitution, and when they do try to quote the Constitution, they're completely wrong, because most of them have never read it. So it's not a matter of the military not fulfilling its oath to protect and defend the Constitution. It's the fact that the American people aren't electing the right people to represent them. So if you elect someone who runs on a platform that they're a socialist and a Marxist and they want to change the American system, you're not allowed to be upset when he starts to do that, because that's the person you voted for. It's that simple. So the military doesn't select our leaders, and we don't change the results of elections. Now, let's say a president about 2 months before re-election decides that the country just can't live without him, and so he's placed all of his cronies in charge of all the various governmental departments and in charge of the military departments, and has a majority in both houses of Congress, and he decides that in September of election year that he's just going to declare that the election's canceled this time, and he's going to stay in office because by God, the country might fall apart if he leaves. Well, that happens quite often in a lot of other countries, just not here. But if it did happen here, then that would be basically an incredible dismantling of our Constitution and our system of governance. Somebody would have to step in. I would imagine that the American people wouldn't tolerate that. But when we talk about what the American people tolerate, you've tolerated a lot. Your rights have been trampled over the last several decades into pieces. And instead of standing up for them and fighting for them, and I don't mean picking up guns and charging the White House. I mean fighting for them in the political arena. You sit on your couches and you watch your quote-unquote reality television, which is all staged and scripted anyway. By the way, True TV, the biggest lie I've ever seen. All those shows are scripted and they're fake. Just so you know. But you don't get upset when they take your rights. You might bitch about it to your friends and family, but you don't do anything about it. You won't pick up a phone and call a senator or a congressman. You won't go to his office and knock on his door and say, hey, what do you think you're doing to my rights? There are roughly 320 million people in this country that we know of. There's a hell of a lot more than that we don't know of. But you can't get 25,000 people to have a rally in Washington for anything decent. You're going to have 50,000 people show up to complain about imaginary ills and crimes that have occurred, but not for anything that actually means anything, like the Constitution. So it's not the role of the military to solve that problem for you. As long as you have the legal right to vote and you can elect your representatives, that's the way our system is designed. It's a representative republic, not a democracy. It's a representative republic. And as long as you have the ability to exercise those rights, the military has no role in your political process. And believe me, for those of you who hate the military so much that go on YouTube and call us murderers and all sorts of other nasty things, first of all, you're not the first retard who's ever said that to members of the military. So, nice try, but you're not really going to get the rise out of people that you think you are. But you're usually the first ones to say that the military is not upholding its oath to the Constitution because we're just sitting back and watching politicians trample it. Well, for somebody who hates the military, why do you want us to be in charge? Because to be quite honest with you, people like you wouldn't fare very well under our system. I would make sure of it if I was in charge. But you don't want the military in charge of you. You don't want the military intervening in your political process. That's what happens in these little less than third world nations all over the world, and that's why you see the chaos and the flames that are floating off of every continent except ours right now in the world. Stability, reliability, and having faith in the people of the United States. Not the politicians, but the people. That they'll elect the appropriate person to office. If you fail to do that as a voter, it's your own problem. You've got 4 years to live through it until you get to fix it. So if you're not involved, if your total involvement is bitching and moaning, you kind of, you get what you pay for on that one. But that's the basic explanation as to why the military doesn't intervene, because as long as you're voting and electing your own representatives, the election process isn't being violated in this country. When it is, when it legitimately is on a grand scale, then I guess we'll see what we see. But for those of you who complain about it, we're not the only ones who take an oath to uphold the Constitution. So do your elected representatives. And if they aren't doing their job, vote them out or throw them out. But find someone who's actually read the document, understands the document, and will adhere to the document. then we may not have as many problems as we have today. Till next time, Mill Pro Akron, train hard, stay alive.